Today, we'll talk about great trading setups with smart money concepts. We'll cover different parts of inefficiency trading, liquidity hunts, and power of three. First of all, I'll talk about what is happening with Bitcoin daily and hourly ranges to follow. Later on, I'll go over trading examples and practices. 4 possible trade setups that we missed over the weekend for day trading and scalping. We have so much to cover. If you're ready, let's start. Welcome our free trading course, all about price action trading strategies and smart money concepts. With this video, I'll cover the basics of smart money concepts. If you are looking for a structured table of contents, I set it up for you. You can find it on Google Drive or directly from my website, which is in the description. It is important to watch videos in order, so you will not miss anything. When I tweeted recently about ranges and fractal structures, I wanted to give attention to people that ranges happen in every price level and time frame. You can see this daily range here. In recent weeks, we continuously traded inside the range high deviation because we were trading the micro ranges like 15 minutes, 5 minutes, or 1 hour inside this deviation. And many people keep missing this important point. Now let's dive into general analysis. Okay, on the weekend I had time off and relaxed my brain and soul. I really suggest you take at least 1 full day off to recharge yourself in this crazy trading world. I've been following this range for a really long time. You can notice how the price makes deviations at the range low and range high levels. You can clearly notice that price strongly reacts to imbalance, which was in the middle of the range, basically the EQ point. If you want to find a much finer and much more precise price level, you can check the triple BPR, a balanced range point that started far back in November. You can see how the price reacts here. However, none of these are important. There are many other imbalances here. How do we choose finer and more usable imbalances? Let's dive into 4 hours and analyze more. In the 4-hour time frame, we can notice many finer and tuned imbalances. But still, there are many other price levels. How do we select the right one? We will get to that. Let's see something else first. Can you notice this amazing trend line, just a textbook perfect trend line? By using these kinds of trend lines, many traders long here. You can notice an extremely sudden drop, which clears all the stop losses under the trend line. Now let's go deeper and find the missed trade opportunities. Let us focus on this 5-minute time frame, which sits around the daily range EQ and the major imbalances from daily and 4 hours. You should know by now, if the high time frame imbalances hold and shifts the structure in lower time frames, we shall be looking long positions here because imbalance will fuel the price for reaction. This is how we choose the most proper imbalances from high time frames. Right at this point, you can notice that price makes a powerful break and shifts the structure. You will see these kinds of concepts mostly around high time frame demand areas like order blocks, breaker blocks, and fair value gaps. All these will make the price react. But before that, I want you to notice this equal lows hunt. Not just daily imbalance in this micro level price, also hunts the equal lows. What does it mean? It means that not only daily and hourly imbalance, these micro equal lows hunt also fuels the price more. Much better chance to find a long setup here. Using my micro premium and discount tool, I'm shaping possible entry areas. Also, classic optimal trade entry. You have seen me take this setup probably 100 times. I posted around 200 real trading examples in the last 1 year. Most of them are based on this setup. This OTE area also collides with this nice imbalance, which also collides with an internal order block. Altogether, this was one of the best entries in this chart. One fine and great trade it could have been. Anyone watching this should have at least booked 2 hours with this clear setup. I want to show you something else, which keeps happening when price reacts to high time frame imbalances or demand areas like order blocks or breaker blocks. You can clearly see that the price starts to create a little consolidation, an accumulation phase. It happens right at the daily and 4-hour imbalance levels. When you see this, you need to understand that the price is getting ready for action, possible stop loss hunt, and reverse reaction. Do you remember these perfect equal lows? One of the amazing traps exists in the trading world. This double bottom or support line, whatever you want to call, keep calling traders. Just like the ring calls the golem in the Lord of the Rings. Most traders cannot resist trading this. It is the precious for them. And the manipulation clears all the stop losses at once. And then starts the phase of expansion, the big reaction. If you backtest whatever you trade, you'll notice this every single day. Now, after the first nice trade opportunity, as you can see, price started to consolidate, basically creating our micro range. Again, micro ranges mostly happen right after high time frame liquidity hunts, like swing failure patterns, or high time frame demand areas like these imbalances. By using the same market structure break, you can still look for trade opportunities. You can notice that another set of equal lows appears on the chart, right at the range discount area. Remember this, you should keep watching equal highs and lows on the charts. They have two purposes: serve as targets or serve as inducement, basically fuel for reverse force. Using simple optimal trade entry and with the help of hunted equal lows, this could have been another set of long entry. Again, why do I look for more longs here rather than shorts? Because of the price at the reaction point of daily and 4-hour imbalance. Now, with this exact same chart, there is also potential reverse optimal trade entry setup, ROTE. Not just that, there is also this great 3-top pattern, TT3 at the top. Now, this ROTE setup could have been a possible play here, and it could have worked. But not this time. Some days you'll lose no matter what. People ask me or mail me a lot, why didn't my setup work? Did I get the wrong bias? Why? I lost the trade. Why? I keep hearing the same questions again and again. When I dig more, I found this out. Most of these people win like 60-70%. More plainly, making 6-7 winners out of 10. But with a single loss, their world shattered and lost in doubt. I think you forget that trading is a game of statistics and possibilities. What do we do here? Make educated guesses and manage our risks. Most of the trading community still cannot embrace this idea. There is no always winning, but only risk management. And I will keep repeating this until the end of time. Okay folks, with this video, you have learned amazing smart money concepts: range trading, imbalance trading, power of 3 trading, and liquidity hunts. All these are extremely critical for professional and successful day traders and scalpers. I hope you subscribe to the channel and like the video. Thank you, please take care, and see you soon.